Hi, it's Rob Moore here and welcome to the Disruptive Entrepreneur channel. So today I am reacting to some David Icke videos. David Icke, twice guest on the Disruptive Entrepreneur show. I want to go back through some of his content and give you my thoughts. David Icke is one of the most conspiracy theorist, controversial characters. He came out decades ago saying, I am the son of God, and was ostracized for decades by humanity. And in the last few years, he's become very popular, and some of the things he predicted, he believes, has come true. And some of the things he says about the current world order are quite out there. So before we go down a David Icke rabbit hole, the second interview on the Disruptive Entrepreneur channel with David Icke has just been released. So before we delve deep into David Icke, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell.
There are very few people control the world. Very few people. People will be staggered how few.
How many?
Well, I'm going to come to that in terms of it's fewer now than
David Icke doesn't like being interrupted.
before, and why. But a lot of people have said in response to that, a few people can't control the world. There's too many people. It's not possible. Well, now we have a handful of people, which you could probably get on 10 fingers.
So David Icke thinks that 10 people or less rule the world. This question is actually what I asked him specifically on the second interview we did with David Icke on who controls the world and the money system. So make sure you watch that.
Control Google, control YouTube, owned by Google, control Facebook.
So David Icke thinks that whoever controls Google and Facebook, and it sounded like therefore, and this is a read, that he didn't think it was Sergey Brin, Mark Zuckerberg. I guess he thinks there's someone higher pulling the strings, but Google, who own YouTube, Facebook, who own WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, they must each have 2 billion, 3 billion customers, customer data records. So you could say that the companies that have the most data own the world.
That absolutely dominate the information that most people see or don't see.
So companies that control the flow of information to those masses, to those billions of people, I think David Icke is suggesting here, own the world. And whilst we may have believed a decade ago that information might flow freely, undoctored, unedited, uncensored, now with Cambridge Analytica and people being cancelled and social media channels choosing what they allow on their platforms, the game has changed.
We have a concentration of power in Silicon Valley, a very small area of the world, that is the greatest concentration of surveillance and censorship power the world has ever seen. They can decide what you see and what you don't see, and they can trawl your data, in other words, the military intelligence community can, to find out the fine detail of your life from the information that you've posted on these various platforms. So that's what we're facing in terms of freedom of speech. It's disappearing. In fact, it doesn't exist. There is no freedom of speech. By the definition of freedom of speech is the freedom to speak your opinion and not have it censored and not have it banned.
So this happened to you, didn't it, at one of your talks where they tried to close it down?
Well, they always try to close my talks down.
You don't seem that bothered.
And when I say they, I'm talking about a ridiculously few people.
Freedom of speech doesn't exist. And if you can't post what you feel is true on social media without them filtering it or editing it, maybe he's right.
You said earlier you can't walk down the street without getting laughed at.
I couldn't. I can now.
Okay. So let's
I
go.
get stopped in the street and talked to very seriously now about what's going on in the world. It's been a dramatic transformation, but it once was like that, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so I'd like to talk about both of those
Okay.
sort of more extreme scenarios. So at first, when that happened, how did it make you feel, and how did you deal with it and cope with it and carry on doing your work despite all this ridicule?
Something inside of me told me this was leading somewhere, and that if I kept going, then that somewhere would emerge. And when you go through the level of ridicule that I did in the early mid-90s, one of two things happens. Either it destroys you and you withdraw from the world, or you let go of the prison that most people live in, which is the fear of what other people think.
So the prison that most people live in is the fear of what other people think. I think this is an intensely deep and accurate statement. There's a study of psychology by Adler, known as Adlerian psychology. And one of the theories of that is that freedom, ultimate freedom, is having the courage to be disliked. So to be your authentic self and share that authentic self with the world and express your thoughts and opinions and vision and mission and cause in the pursuit of self-actualization and helping as many people on this planet. Freedom is when you can do that without caring what they think, without worrying about what they say, and without the feeling of fear of judgment and ridicule and ostracization. And so I would say that's the ultimate courage. And I would say if you can embrace more pissing people off and being disliked in the pursuit of expressing who you really are, and that doesn't mean being a dick, by the way, but who you really are, I completely agree that this is a prison, and this could be one of the most profound things that you watch on a YouTube video. And actually really pleased to hear David Icke talking about it, because most people just attach him to conspiracy theories, but this is why I wanted to ask him. People sometimes accuse me of just getting gimmicky guests who are controversial. Jordan Peterson, Katie Hopkins, David Icke. This is not why I do it. I do it because people who've survived through and thrived in intense ridicule and criticism know shit you don't. And people like me, if I can extract out how they've gone on that journey, that can be a great gift to you.
Most people are not living their lives. They're not living who they are. They're living what they think others think they should be.
This is a bomb-dropping episode. So most people are not living their lives. They're living who other people feel they should be. Like, imagine if you didn't have to please your parents. Imagine if you didn't have to please your employers or your employees. Imagine if you didn't have to please the community or social media or the commentators or critics. Imagine if you didn't have to please them. Who would you really be? And again, I'm not saying that gives you an excuse to be a dick. Imagine if you were the only person on the planet. How might you think and act differently?
They're living someone else's version of them. What happened to me as a result of that massive ridicule is that I let go of the fear of what other people thought.
So one of the greatest gifts of great challenge, like intense ridicule with David Icke, is it forces you to grow. And I believe if you faced more challenge and you faced more critics and you faced your fears, you'd realize it doesn't matter what people think. And those fears are not really as big as you'd made them in your mind. And I think that's like an exorcism. It's like a lightening of the entire body.
And when you do that, it's indescribable what that does, because no more mental gymnastics before you open your mouth. What do I say here?
They want you, don't they?
Hello? Hello, darling.
Yeah, I'm in the
He's
middle of
just
an interview.
answered the
Would you
phone.
like to be part of it?
So a few years ago when we went on the ferry to the Isle of Wight to interview David Icke for the first time, I wouldn't say I knew a huge amount about him. I knew of his online revelation. I knew that he used to be a goalkeeper, I believe, footballer, sports presenter, and that he'd made some pretty big outrageous statements about being the son of God. And of course, since then, people talk about him and the lizard people living in the moon. So I think you get these sound bites, but it's always been my mission on the Disruptive Entrepreneur show to seek the truth from the person, or seek the person's truth, as opposed to the narrative and the opinion of other people. And so I like to challenge myself to go and do that. And I also like to bring an enterprising entrepreneurial angle, which is not just talk about all the things that are wrong in the world, but then the solutions to those. So I was quite excited to go and see him, maybe a bit apprehensive about some rabbit holes we might go down, or some of his more left field beliefs. I agree with David Icke that we must preserve the right for freedom of speech. And in certain media, it seems like freedom of speech actually means you can say what you want unless I don't agree with it. And on social media, I think this has trickled down to normal people, you know, the critics and the commentators on the content, where they get really pissed and angry if you don't agree with their statements. They disagree with you, they troll you, you stand up for your opinion, they troll you again, you turn the tables on their opinion, they troll you again. So I do think there's this, everyone thinks that they've got a massive right to be pissed off, and everyone's happy to say you've got freedom of speech unless you challenge their values and views. And that's not what freedom of speech is. I haven't got to the bottom of who actually controls Google and Facebook and Amazon and all these big channels that control the information flow. Let me know in the comments if you know anything more about that, because everyone just says, oh, it's the Rothschilds, but what does that mean? So David Icke has been banned from every channel, it looks like. He's been banned from Facebook, Twitter. I actually think that's wrong. I don't agree with David Icke on the reptilian elite, that the elite are actually blood-drinking, flesh-eating, shape-shifting, extraterrestrial, reptilian humanoids. I need that one proven first. Is David Icke misunderstood? Yes. Is he delusional? Well, who am I to say if he's delusional? Because we all have our own opinions, and if someone doesn't agree with us, someone could accuse us of being delusional. He's definitely misunderstood. He makes some very good points. I think he goes to the extreme on them, and sometimes I wonder if reality is really like the extreme that he proposes. Usually when I go into an interview, we do a fair bit of research. We cancel out a lot of standard research and usual questions and come in with our own more disruptive or more unique questions. And my main challenge with interviewing people is often having enough questions. It's completely the opposite with David. So we've been doing a fair bit of research for the second interview we're doing with him, and really we're probably going to have 3 or 4 key research questions. So I interviewed Floyd Mayweather. I asked him 29 questions in 24 minutes. What would you say has been your greatest fight of all time?
All of them.
If I had 29 questions for David Icke, I'd win the world record for the longest live streamed interview. So preparation for him is very different. And watching back on some of the videos, I kind of cringe at myself a little bit, because there's 2 or 3 times where I interject and David just carries on talking over me. And as an interviewer, that's not a great skill. You've got to know when to interject. But I also know that's part of David and who he is. And essentially, many of the interviews with him can become monologues. And I'm happy for them to go there. But as an interviewer, I'm also trying to guide the conversation, because a lot of people that watch my content, they're enterprising, they're entrepreneurial. They want to take this information and figure out how they can do it to create value and meaning in their life, as opposed to just going down the deepest rabbit holes and then being left there. I think some conspiracy theories must be true, because humanity is capable of great evil if challenged enough. I just don't know which ones are true. Because how would you ever unless you are on the board of the globe? And do we even know who's on the board of the globe? So make sure you watch the second interview with David Icke on the Disruptive Entrepreneur show. And if you enjoyed me reacting to some of the content we've created with David Icke, I have the full 2-hour unedited episode. So make sure you go check that out, and make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. And if you don't risk anything, you risk everything.